Good morning, everyone. It's now 10 o'clock and the stage 1 hearings for the examination into the Winchester District Local Plan 2020 to 2040. I'll refer to it as the District Plan, the plan. What does the Council refer to it as?
The plan.
Yes, the plan. We'll all know what we're talking about. So it's now open. Now, my name is Roisin Barrett. I'm a Chartered Town Planner. I've been appointed by the Secretary of State to carry out this independent examination of the Winchester District Local Plan 2020-2040, and that is document SD01, submission document. I tend to refer to as this, as I said, the plan, or the submitted plan, maybe it's called. This hearing session, and subject to my findings on the plan's legal compliance and subsequent hearings that will take place April, May and June, are part of the examination process, which started with the submission plan. Now, the plan was submitted sometime in November of last year. The examination will end with the submission of my report to the Council. At this stage, I'd like to introduce Jill Taylor, who's the Programme Officer. Many of you will have already been in touch with her. She's working independently of the Council at my direction and is responsible for all the administrative arrangements for the examination. Now, if you've got any queries on the running of the examination and hearing sessions, please have a word with her, or indeed email her. Her details are on the examination website. Now, microphones, I seem to have negotiated it okay. So you literally just press a button. Now, it is important, because the sessions are being recorded, it is important that you use the microphone, please. So can you all ensure that you do? Have I got the ability to cut people off?
No, no.
No. Normally when you speak, people can't talk over you. So, okay, that's fine. Could I please ask everyone to turn phones to silent, or, your laptops or whatever, so that they're not pinging? It can just be very distracting. The WCs, could I ask somebody from the Council, or are you able to say where the toilets are, please, just to direct people?
Toilets are on the floor below. When you get to the bottom of the stairs, the ladies to the left and the gents to the right.
Now, in terms of fire alarms, we are expecting a test this morning. That'll happen at 10:15. Could somebody from the Council tell me what we do if there's a real one, which will be any time apart from 10:30 today?
Yeah, this room will exit through the double doors there and down the fire escape. Anybody in the Wickham room will come out the door, and directly to their left there is another fire escape which will join up with this one.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Okay, guidance notes, hearing programme and agenda. I assume that everybody has already seen copies of the guidance notes. That's ED 14. Matters, issues and questions. That's ED 13 and 17. And then there was another one on H4. And the hearing programme version 2, that's ED 15. Now, that might be subject to change, but at a late date, I won't be changing it, particularly because we've had the Easter break. All of those were published several months ago. If you go to the website and review those as you need to. My guidance note, ED 14, explains more about the examination. I've identified a number of matters and issues to be investigated, taking account of representations made on the plan, and the hearing sessions will be based on those. But just to help everyone, and it was the Easter break and the agendas haven't been published on the website, but I have produced agendas for today, and that'll just help in focusing people's minds, because I'm not going to ask questions on every matter and issue that I've raised. I'm going to focus them, and what I've tried to do is state the big items: plan period, duty, meeting other authorities' needs. I've tried to stage them through so that we're not just dealing with those big items in one session. So that might help people. Now, the purpose of the examination, my role in conducting the examination is to decide whether the plan has been prepared in accordance with the requirements of the Planning Compulsory Purchase Act Act 2004 as amended and associated regulations, and whether it meets the test of soundness set out in paragraph 35 of the MPPF, National Planning Policy Framework, and I'll refer to it as the MPPF or the framework. Now, the 4 tests of soundness that I have to consider are whether the plan is positively prepared, and that's based on a strategy which seeks to meet objectively assessed development and infrastructure requirements consistent with achieving sustainable development. Justified, the most appropriate strategy when considered against reasonable alternatives based on proportionate evidence. Effective, the plan should be deliverable over its period, which implies flexibility and the ability to be monitored. Consistent with national policy, the plan should enable the delivery of sustainable development in accordance with the policies of the MPPF, the framework. Now, I've read all the representations and supporting material provided by all parties and the written statements prepared for the hearings. So the hearing sessions, as I said, won't be an inquiry into all the matters raised. Their purpose is to help me decide whether the local plan is legally compliant and sound. Written material has already been provided by me with enough information. Sorry, the written material that's been provided to me on some subjects is enough for me to come to my conclusion. So if I don't wish to discuss something at a local plan hearing, it doesn't mean that everything's fine. It means that actually I don't need any help on that. I've got a lot, I've looked at the written material and I've been able to come to my conclusion on that basis. So that explains why the hearing agendas don't always include questions on every matter and issue. Sometimes questions will be different to those raised in the MRQs. The hearings will simply focus on the matters that I need to hear about. Now, an important point is that my starting point for the examination is the assumption that the council has submitted what it considers to be a legally compliant and sound plan. Those considering the plan is not legally compliant or seeking changes to the plan for soundness purposes have to demonstrate to me why it isn't legally compliant or why it isn't sound. So I'll be looking at how the representations relate to the tests of legal compliance and soundness that I've just read out, and to demonstrate that to me, rather than considering individual objections. When we get to a more detailed level, it's important that I understand which parts of the plans you consider to be unsound and what changes to wording, etc., that you think need to be made in order to make it sound. Now, if I were to conclude that the plan is not legally compliant or sound, the council wouldn't be able to adopt it in its current form. The council's already suggested some modifications to the plan in response to a combination of your representations during pre-submission consultations, my matters and issues, and what it suggested are editing corrections. Now, those are encompassed in submission documents SD 14A, 14B, that's a schedule of proposed plan changes and changes to the policy map, that's SD 14C. Now, under section 27C of the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act 2004 as amended, the council has formally requested that as part of the examination process, I make recommendations to the council for any main modifications to the plan that I consider necessary in order to enable the plan to be legally compliant and to be found sound. And that's included in the council's Reg 22 submission letter. So I need to decide whether the main modifications that the council is proposing meet the tests of soundness that I've read out, and if so, whether they would actually do the job. So I'll be picking up on that later. Now, given the nature of the concerns expressed at Reg 19 stage and on submission of the plan, I've staged the hearing session. And after each stage, I'll assess whether the examination should proceed to the next stage. This is a normal way of working. So these hearing sessions comprise part 1 of the examination. So this hearing session is dealing with legal and procedural compliance only. So I'll assess whether the council has complied with the legal and procedural requirements in preparing the plan, and that includes the requirements under section 33A of the Planning Compulsory Purchase Act 2004 as amended in relation to the duty to cooperate. That applies to the preparation of local plans so far as relating to a strategic matter. Local planning authorities must demonstrate how they've complied with the duty at examination. Right, so in a minute, I'll ask the council to start off with a brief introduction to the plan, to detail the procedures followed so far and to confirm its view that all the necessary regulations and procedures have been complied with, and then we'll then go straight into the meat of matter one, procedural and legal compliance. We may have a short break depending on time. Now, the hearing sessions will be structured but informal discussions focusing on a particular matter being considered. The hearings will only cover, as I said, the issues that I want information on. Now, what I intend to do, I will spend some time with the council. I have questions and I want to make sure that those are answered. But then what I'll do, I expect to go around the table. I expect to go around the table once on each item. Rebuttals of others' contributions aren't encouraged, and I'll act to prevent repetitions of points that are made. Therefore, for example, if somebody says, well, I think X, Y, and Z, and you're just about to say the same thing, please don't repeat it. Say, well, I've heard what so-and-so said. I agree with all of that. Can I add to that? Because it just isn't helpful hearing the same thing all the time. I may myself seek further comment in the interest of clarification on what's been said and pursue a point further, and I may go back to the council and ask for a response on a particular point. Now, I want to encourage everybody to contribute, but please do so through me. If you wish to speak, the normal way is if you put your nameplate up like that, and I'll know that you want to speak and I'll bring you in at the appropriate time. Now, as I said, the sessions are being recorded to enable others to observe at a later date. Could I just turn to the council? What are the arrangements for the storage of the recordings? How will they be stored? When will they be destroyed? Have we come to an agreement on that, or could we come to an agreement on that?
Thank you, Inspector. We certainly can. The intention is to put them on the local plan dedicated website. Obviously, we'll have to look at our data protection requirements in terms of retention, but certainly, obviously, that's our intention to put them up there. We're trying to put them up there as soon as we can. Obviously, they've got to go to our comms team to be basically uploaded to the website, but they're on standby, ready to do that. But that's our intention. Subject to any thoughts that you've got. Thank you.
Okay, and sorry, so they'll go up on the website straight away. Obviously, you will comply with GDPR. And what about retention, and when will they be destroyed?
I think I'll have to take guidance from our GDPR officer, but I presume that probably 6 months, 12 months would probably be a reasonable period, subject to any guidance that you've got on the matter.
Okay, well, usually it's sort of after the challenge period. Usually, if they're up, but we don't want them hanging around. It's most uncomfortable, quite frankly. So let's get rid of them as soon as it's. So if you don't mind, please could I ask for a short note on that to confirm what the arrangements are, and we can make sure that that's on the website. So in terms of today, I'll aim to, we will take breaks. It's hard work for those around the table, for the council and for myself. So we will take breaks. We'll take a mid-morning break. We'll take an afternoon break. I intend to finish by 5. I'm sure that everyone, because we've had the Easter break, I'm sure that lots of people were travelling early this morning. possibly working over the weekend. So we'll make sure that we stage it so that everybody's comfortable. Mid breaks, usually about 30 minutes if we can, but we will play by ear. I must stress that participants should be seated and ready to begin the session at the allocated time. So please return promptly from breaks. Now, I'm familiar with the area. I've visited it many times, including the main settlements and the surrounding countryside, the South Downs National Park and the countryside beyond, both in my personal capacity and indeed as part of this examination. So I've got an understanding of the area generally, the key issues and sites, supplemented by my reading. I've progressed the examination in the interests of good planning and decision making, but I will need to visit individual sites as I consider necessary, which is a very important part of my deliberations. And so I will conduct site visits, both during, some sites I've already visited where I can see them from the road, but during the examination and indeed after. Now, these usually take place on an unaccompanied basis, but if I wish or if I need to conduct an accompanied site visit, i.e. if I need access to the site and the site owner needs to be present or whatever, could the council please tell me? So could I ask you to make a note of those, and then I'll make sure that I do those at the appropriate time. So from the outset, I just want to make a few points clear. As I said, the basis of the examination is that submitted, ST01. Proposed modifications have been put to me by the council, but my starting point is the submitted plan. I'll assess all modifications suggested. Those are in ST14A and B. I'll come to my conclusion on whether they're minor in nature, and therefore, if that's the case, they're actually additional modifications, and that's nothing to do with me. That's to do with the council, and I'll leave it for the council to deal with that. So those sorts of things will be editing, factual corrections that don't go to the heart of soundness, editing, that sort of thing. If considered to be main modifications, I'll assess whether they should be taken forward in the light of the tests of soundness. And that's obviously because any suggested changes or corrections that you've put in your list of proposed modifications haven't been the subject of consultation, they haven't been through SA, IIA, and they haven't been subject to HRA. So at the moment, I've got a composite list. What I'd like, please, is the council to produce a schedule of modifications. That should be called proposed main modifications. So strip out all of those little corrections and make a judgment as to whether they're additional modifications or main modifications. I will also look at that and I'll check that. I'll go through both lists. And if there are any things that you have considered additional modifications and I think they're main mods, I'll shout and let you know. That list, SD14B, includes changes to maps in the plan, doesn't it? Now, in the main, I think most of them relate to the marking of the South Downs National Park, don't they? But those are part of the plan, so they will come within main mods. I mean, it's up to you how you present those. If they are indeed, as I look through, I think most of them are related to the South Downs National Park. So it may make sense to keep them separately so that they don't clutter up the main mods, but I'll leave it that to you. So also what I would like to do is if you can arrange those main mods so that we have one per policy. At the moment, I don't know, we're getting into the hundreds already, aren't we? So one per policy. So we've got strategic policy SP1. We have all the suggested main mods, or indeed if we agree as we go along, main mods to that plan, to that policy, including the supporting text. And then we're just very clear you know, MM1 relates to X policy, MM2 relates to X policy, and it just simplifies the process and it helps with reporting. Now, as the policies map is not defined in statute as a development plan document, I don't have the power to make recommendations, recommended changes to it. However, I'll look to ensure that consequential changes to the policies map are included. So I will be cross-referencing, but if it is the case that we go out to consultation on main mods, you'll go out to consultation on the development plan changes. And if I'm when I'm reporting, I will refer to consequential changes needed. For example, if a site allocation boundary changes or something like that, or if something's included or something comes out. Is that clear? Okay, thank you. Secondly, I want to make very clear the approach I'll be taking to emission sites. And those from the development industry around the table will be perfectly familiar with this. Part of my task is to examine the soundness of the approach to meeting the plan's needs, including sites that are allocated for development in the plan. Those who have submitted representations to the effect that a site is unsound will be able to put their views to me at the relevant hearing session if they've made a request to do so. The council will obviously have an opportunity to respond. Now, sites that are put forward for inclusion in the plan but not selected for allocation are known informally as emission sites. It is not part of my role to examine the soundness of emission sites, and subject to the legal right to be heard, such sites won't normally be discussed in detail at these hearing sessions. Now, should the situation arise that additional sites are needed, for example, because I don't know, spatial strategy, housing requirement plan period, all of those things, is found to be unsound, or one or more of the allocated sites is found to be unsound, I'll in the first instance look to the council to put to me what alternative site should be brought forward for examination, and then they'll go through the appropriate way. So I just want to make that very clear, because we don't want to spend time in raising emission sites. One thing I do want to say, just for clarification, and it is already clarified, the plan is being examined against the version of the framework 2023. That is the December version. That was all bottomed out before we got down to hearing sessions, and I think indeed the representations I've heard, I've read, that point is very clear. So before each hearing session, it's helpful for me if the council tell me who's speaking, unless you've already done so, who's speaking and on what topics you're speaking. That's helpful to me. So if you can give me a list before each session, if it differs from session to session, if it's the same people the whole way through, don't bother. But it's just helpful to me. Okay, is there anything else that's glaringly obvious that I haven't addressed? Okay, could I please ask the council, would you like to introduce your plan, explain its purpose, and as I said, explain to the room what your position is?
Yes, thank you, Ma'am.
Thank you very much.
Perhaps I should just start with a few essential introductions. Loath to put myself into that category, but I suppose I should. My name is Andrew Fraser Urquhart, King's Counsel. I'm representing the council throughout this examination process. I will be assisted, of course, by a number of officers throughout, but primarily by the gentleman who sits to my immediate left, who is Mr. Adrian Fox, who is the head of the team which has been preparing this local plan and will be contributing to most of the sessions today. The other officers I'll introduce, if I may, on an ad hoc basis. For future sessions, we'll try and provide you with a list in advance, but today you'll just have to allow me that indulgence. I propose to make a brief opening statement which deals not just with today's matters but with the plan generally. I've had that reduced in writing and I think it can be distributed now to you and other participants.
Have you got a copy for everyone around the table? Okay. Absolutely, that's fine.
We can provide an electronic version of this if people want it for their records in due course.
Thank you.
And whilst it's distributed, may I take the opportunity to formally welcome you to Winchester for this examination process and to welcome all the other participants of what is importantly a collaborative and cooperative process. Also to record for the first time, I suspect it won't be the last, our thanks to Jill Taylor for all her work in running and organising this examination. Programme officer is an incredibly important part of the process, as we all know. Ma'am, dealing with the substance, the Winchester City Council Local Plan 2040, the plan, is a positive and effective strategy that will secure the successful delivery of sustainable communities. It will facilitate economic growth and reduce inequalities, making this district a place where people wish to live, work, stay and visit. Now, as you have mentioned, Ma'am, it's very important to note that this local plan is being examined as provided for by the transitional arrangements in the new current NPPF, but it's being examined under the provisions of the December 2023 NPPF. Now, we in the council fully accept and understand that the government has set new higher housing requirements. And we already know that many developers and site promoters will be putting forward the case at this examination that we should be planning for those higher housing numbers now in this plan. However, we don't adopt that approach. We are committed to meeting the new housing numbers in a new local plan, but we want to proceed with adopting this local plan and then start work immediately on the new local plan. Now, it may be suggested that this is to kick the can down the road, to use that phrase, but nothing could be further from the truth. We've taken a conscious decision that we need an effective plan now, whilst we proceed at pace with our review to respond to the demands of the new housing numbers. The alternative, bluntly, would be the disruption of a period of what's sometimes called planning by appeal, as we'd be left without an effective plan. And whilst no doubt some at this examination would probably welcome that, the reality is that that would not be good planning. And that is the basis of our strategy at this examination. Now, with that said, one mustn't think that the adoption of this local plan won't secure substantial new housing through this plan. It will. It will maintain new allocations and maintain a high level of provision until a new local plan is adopted. It will also immediately provide substantial help to other authorities in meeting their needs. And all of this will help to ensure that a plan-led approach is maintained with a healthy housing land supply situation, providing stable planning and decision-making while the new local plan is prepared. Now, as you'll know, since the adoption of the elements of the last local plan, the joint course strategy in 2013 and the development management and site allocations local plan in 2017, there have been and continue to be a number of significant changes to national planning policy and legislation, even before the most recent iteration in the new NPPF. And this local plan accordingly represents a significant change from our previous plans, as it has been designed to address a number of new key challenges, the biggest of which, of course, is climate change. As you know, this council has declared a climate change emergency, and we're very conscious that this area has an above average carbon footprint. This plan addresses the challenge head on. To support our goal for the district to be carbon neutral by 2030, the plan sets amongst the highest standards possible for environmental design for homes and for commercial development, all designed to cut carbon emissions and, coincidentally, to reduce bills for users. We also face a challenge of affordability. This plan takes a new approach to affordable housing targets based on extensive viability testing, replacing an expectation that was too often missed in the past with now a minimum requirement for provision. We also face the challenge of protecting our district's chalk streams and rivers and, alongside our neighbours, the Solent, from increases in phosphorus and nitrogen nutrient pollution. We continue to innovate to tackle this alongside government, the Partnership for South Hampshire and local landowners, and we now have an agreed nutrient budget for the local plan. And finally, we face the challenge of protecting our natural environment. Our cities, towns and villages in this area are surrounded by beautiful green spaces and countryside. This local plan prioritises the use of previously developed land and seeks to phase some greenfield development to post 2030 in those interests. The local plan responds positively to these issues, seeking opportunities to meet the development needs of the district and planning to meet the standard method for homes, while also including an unmet housing need allowance for our neighbours. The preparation of this local plan has been shaped by extensive consultation, which is ongoing, and engagement involving local people, businesses, community groups, and external stakeholders. And we have to say, rather proud of the fact that we have won 2 RTPI awards for our consultation and engagement efforts, which have involved 4 separate stages of consultation in 2018, 2021, 2022, and last year, 2024. And of course, as you'd expect, alongside the preparation of the local plan, a sustainability appraisal through the umbrella of the integrated impact assessment has been undertaken to assess reasonable alternatives and consider the plan's overall environmental, social and economic impacts. A habitats regulations assessment has also been undertaken, and all of this work has informed the preparation of the plan. We have, again, as part of our engagement and consultation with both officers and the relevant cabinet member, participated in advisory meetings with the Planning Inspectorate, and of course all of this has resulted in a series of local plan topic papers on a number of key issues for people to see the way we have approached issues. We've worked in a collaborative and constructive way with key stakeholders, and statements of common ground have been successfully agreed with all of our neighbouring local authorities and a number of statutory agencies. Again, it's a measure of the effort that's been put into this, that there are no outstanding areas of dispute between ourselves and either neighbouring local planning authorities or statutory agencies. Now, as part of that process, it's important to note that throughout the process and the journey of preparing this local plan, the unmet need and the supply in other areas has been constantly changing in terms of planning permissions granted, local plan positions, and the work of the Partnership for South Hampshire. And so on each of the occasions that we consider, we'll see that those numbers are a snapshot in time, constantly changing, and the plan has had to be prepared against that basis, which we'll explore in detail shortly. It's also important to note that no other local planning authority in Hampshire, apart from Fareham, have recently adopted local plans, again adding to that churn of uncertainty against which our contribution to unmet need has been arrived at. And it's important to note that it's not the case that Winchester is the only place within the South Hampshire area that can accommodate unmet needs. Now, with all of that said, we are stepping up, as you'll see in due course, and playing our role. The plan also identifies and prioritises a number of opportunities for exciting brownfield regeneration projects in Winchester town, and the council has a major role to play in delivering this change and is committed to effective partnership working with a range of public, private and voluntary sector organisations to deliver these key regeneration aspects. And of course, the local plan is a vital part of that process. Now, we consider that the plan takes a balanced approach in allocating the right sites for development, in promoting sustainable growth, recognising what is valued in the district, as well as striking the right balance between flexibility and certainty. We are keen to adopt this local plan and to begin implementing its policies so that we have an up-to-date planning framework through a robust local plan that can deal with the assessment of current and future planning applications to ensure that decisions are taken in accordance with a plan-led system. And finally, looking to the future, an updated local development scheme has been agreed at Cabinet February of this year, which sets out the timetable both for the adoption of this local plan, which we hope to achieve this year, and for the next local plan to begin, which reinforces our commitment to meeting the higher housing requirements, which we know we will have to do. And so to conclude, Ma'am, we consider that the plan provides a sound and positive strategy for achieving sustainable development and meeting the district's identified needs. And we look forward to vindicating that position through this examination. Thank you, Ma'am. That's my introductory statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Urquhart. Are there any other matters that we need to deal with before we get into the meat of things? Because we've actually completed that opening, etc., quicker than I anticipated. No? Okay, let's move on then to deal with the matters in hearing session 1. And those matters deal with procedural and legal requirements. So let's get straight into the meat of it. Let's deal with duty to cooperate. Now, I just want to be very clear to frame this discussion. This is about legal and procedural compliance. So I don't want to get into matters of soundness. So, for example, is the unmet need figure enough, and what does that mean for the spatial strategy, and what does it mean for the numbers? I want to keep very clearly to the procedural and legal compliance. Now, MPPF paragraph 134, 24 to 27 explains to us that cooperation with adjoining neighbours and strategic partners should be effective and ongoing joint working. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to come to an agreement, but it does mean that there needs to be evidence, and that needs to be evidenced, of effective and ongoing joint working. So I want to raise the issue. I want to concentrate on the way in which you worked with the partnership for South Hampshire. So my understanding is that what you say to me is that you've worked through the partnership for South Hampshire. You've explained that you've carried out joint evidence base, that you've worked alongside them, and indeed you've had statements of common ground 2020, 21, 22. You've had rounds of consultation. You've explained to me 4 rounds, some of which you've won awards for, and you've got 4 formal groups. So what you say is that a lot of the duty work was encapsulated within that work. Is that right? Have I got that right?
I can answer that. It's an important element of the duty to cooperate, but it's not the sole kind of thing.
Okay.
Basically, obviously, the Partnership for South Hampshire Urban Area only covers the southern part of the district. And obviously, we participate through Officers Group, which is called the Push POG, which at one stage was meeting every 6 weeks. There's a joint committee that oversees basically the push kind of agenda. And that's obviously one element. But obviously, there are separate duty to cooperate meetings that take place. And obviously, there are other meetings that we attend as officers. So, for example, I attend a development plans meeting where obviously, undoubtedly, the issue of housing numbers comes up. And my other colleagues attend other meetings, such as monitoring meetings. So they all together kind of deal with obviously how we engage and cooperate. And it has been constructive, I believe, and ongoing. In terms of what we've done. And like I say, push is an important element, but it's not the sole element.
So you were continuing with your plan, and in 2023, we had the publication of the joint position statement, didn't we? And so I just want to get my thoughts on this clear. And what that did, it set out a two-stage approach. So first of all, in the short term, you would be the need would be met through those adjoining authorities who were able to meet their local housing need plus, with a longer term strategy that set out broad areas, etc. And those would be pursued, and the numbers would be pursued through those relevant local plans. Now, what I'm hearing from many around the table, and what it ended up with at Reg 18 stage, you identified that you had a surplus against local housing needs, and that surplus was in the region of 1900. And then Portsmouth and Havant came forward and said, well, made a formal request to meet housing needs, and indeed you came forward and said, well, you know, we have this, what was a buffer, we have this, and we'll meet your unmet needs. How did you engage with Havant and Portsmouth between that time? So the position statement was 2023. The plan was at Reg 18 stage at that point. Okay, tell me how you engaged with Portsmouth and Havant when that statement, that position statement, was published.
Thank you. Well, obviously, Portsmouth and Havant are part of push, so they were involved in the discussions. I do think it's really important to kind of slightly, if I may, just backtrack, because the position of the unmet need, which is basically after this discussion, has been very fluid and keeps on changing. And it has changed throughout my time here, which has started in 2020, where obviously haven't had a local plan that went to examination. And at that time, basically they could meet all their needs. And Portsmouth, their unmet need wasn't as high as what it is now. So we are dealing with a local plan that basically is changing. It comes back to Mr. Fraser-Urquhart's opening speech about where the figure is moving constantly. And obviously that is challenging for a local plan to move forward, because otherwise you wouldn't get off the starting blocks, quite frankly. So we had engagement with them. Obviously they formally wrote to us, both local authorities, and we met with them to discuss obviously the contents of their letter.
At what point did they form it? That was 2024, wasn't it?
That was 2024. And by that stage, obviously we'd finished the Reg 18 analysis, and we were actually on to testing basically options with strategic transport assessment, because the strategic transport assessment takes probably around 12 months to complete. So by that stage, we were already basically working with our colleagues at Hampshire to produce the strategic transport assessment. And that is important in terms of, obviously, you need to know what your baseline is and what allocations you've got to do those scenario testings. So obviously we did three lots of testing. Obviously what's happening now, business as usual, what obviously the allocations would do, and obviously, we tested it that way. So those discussions took place with the officers, and obviously at that time in the Reg 18, our unmet need was, I think, 1,400. We've subsequently increased it in the Reg 19 to 1,900 in recognition. Now, at the Reg 18 stage, we were very clear that that unmet need was for push, because at that stage we didn't know who basically needed that need. And obviously we were under the assumption that push would progress quicker with its work than it did. And obviously trying to collectively agree with a number of local authorities is never going to be straightforward. It's always going to take time, and it did take time to basically come up with that agreed position statement. So those discussions took place, and obviously we were very clear about what we could do, and obviously recognising that obviously, if we could do a bit more, which we did in the Reg 19, that would obviously help. But in no way, obviously, we're not the only local authority in terms of where they can look for, particularly with Havant. Obviously, their partners, next door neighbour is East Hants. And obviously, it's just a moment in time, as Andrew Fraser-Urquhart said. Basically, the figure keeps changing in terms of planning permissions, where local plans are up with their plans in terms of bringing forward allocations. And now, obviously, there's an impetus by our neighbours to bring forward plans. We are obviously at the forefront of that in terms of where we are in the position. Hence why basically we've now agreed with Portsmouth to Havant that obviously a proportion of that unmet need, the 1,900, could be divided between those two local authorities. And that was through meetings that we had with them about how to divvy that up. We've been very clear that we had a discussion with Portsmouth, and they had a PINS advisory meeting, that we can attribute a specific site to a local authority, because we can't control where people will live and work. But what we can say is obviously there's a percentage of that unmet need would be available to those local authorities as they progress.
And we'll get on to, how that was calculated, etc. But okay, so at Reg 18 stage, you've said Reg 18 stage, you had that position statement. You could, of course, have gone back and retested, couldn't you? You could have retested, you could have seen, oh, this is the need. We've got the broad areas of search. We'll go back, we'll test our scenarios, we'll feed it in, IIA, STA, etc., etc. Tell me why you didn't do that.
Once we knew what obviously the broad areas of search, and obviously you'll be aware that obviously Easter Botley is identified in that statement. The trouble was that the push position statement didn't identify the exact area of, if we talk specifically about Easter Botley, what that area was, how big it could be, what the quantum could be. It's also in multiple ownerships. So from a strategic transport assessment, you need to know what the quantity is to basically test something. You can't just test something broadly. And no master planning work had undertaken of Easter Botley. It had gone through obviously our HRA sustainability appraisal, and obviously we were concerned too that obviously it needed to be assessed against other reasonable alternatives. Basically, and obviously, like I say, we would have to go back because it was different to our strategy, back right to the beginning again, and we wouldn't move forward. And coming back to the reasons for Andrew Fraser-Urquhart, we want to bring this plan in. We've identified, for example, that land at Eastern Botley is a consideration for the next local plan, and we will be looking at it, and we are looking at it in detail, but not for this local plan.
Okay, so you could have done that work. You could have done it as part of this plan. You decided not to, as a pragmatic. Sorry, I don't want to put words into that. As a pragmatic response to get a plan in place, because it would have meant that all those evidence-based documents that support would have had to. Okay, I understand that. Okay, I'm happy to open it up to those around the table. Now, Mr. Berent, you made comments, HBF. I'm sorry, I can't see the nameplate. Some people around the table I know, but some, thank you very much. If you don't mind, when you put your nameplate up, just in case I don't know who you are, would you mind, please, just putting it so that I can see it. So HBF, Mr. Berent, you made comments, and I know that a lot of other people actually referred to their comments. So could you just explain your position, please?
Yes, thank you, Mum, and thank you for the council's position on that. I think my concern, our concern, is really comes back to section 338 of the compulsory purchase act in terms of how is the duty to cooperate maximise effectiveness? How is it the council worked with its neighbours in terms of looking at what those unmet needs are, and then how has that influenced the plan as it's moved forward? I think you've arrived on it, Ma'am, in terms of your questioning with regard to that, in terms of could you have gone back? And I think that's the point at which our concerns in terms of the cooperation that's happened. It has happened, obviously there is the partnership for Southampton that's been there and worked forward. But in terms of, say, looking at the work they've done with Havant sort of directly, and Havant's original statement on ground suggests that no engagement happened between regulation and regulation 19. So you have that uncertainty with regard to the unmet need. But as you move through the plan making process, you'd expect that certainty to solidify in terms of going forward. And I think it has in terms of the December 2023 work. And to suggest, Ma'am, that they didn't know about that unmet need prior to that point would seem surprising. You would expect that if there had been the joint work going forward, that level of unmet need would be known in advance of that, and that is obviously 9 months prior to the regulation 19 consultation coming forward. So, in terms of looking at that level of unmet need and the scale of what that unmet need is, there could have been considerations as moving through that process that there is likely to be a higher figure, and actually ensuring that the council looks beyond what was essentially a position that was agreed in the original consultation, the Strategic Issues and Priorities Regulation 18, which didn't look at unmet need, but in response to that, they said, okay, there's the windfall element that is then brought in to address some of that. So it's that process in terms of moving through, in terms of saying, actually, there is some, but actually, is it going to be more? Is it going to be higher? And how can we look to address that? And how does that maximise the effectiveness of this process? And that's where it comes back to that legal process, Ma'am, in terms of actually, how is the cooperation affected? There is some in terms of but it is that direct engagement that seems to have been lacking in terms of saying, actually, this is the wider issue, but actually, what about our neighbours in terms of that, and trying to seek and find out what that level of unmet need. And I think that seems to be where there's a bit of a gap, Ma'am, in terms of that ongoing cooperation. I think there are issues in terms of we shouldn't be looking to push towards pushing things down the road. Mr. Fraser Urquhart said kicking the can down the road. I think it's in terms of the MPPF, and so it's not looking to address the needs that are there now, and not delaying in terms of that position. And I think that is again a key part in terms of paragraph 35 in terms of effectiveness, and that really relates back to have they looked to maximise the effectiveness of this plan through the cooperation. And I don't think they have in terms of that process. They have relied on the partnership for Southampton in terms of that, rather than actually seeking to quantify that as they've gone through the plan making process, with seemingly quite large gaps between the regulation 18 and the regulation 19 in terms of that engagement. Some engagement has happened post that, and they have arrived at a change statement of common ground with Havant and with regard to the proportion, and welcome the clarity in terms of that proportion. But it's really have they considered, could they done more in terms of maximising that effectiveness? That's our position, Mark.
Thank you very much, Mr. Byrne. Okay, that's the nub of the concerns that I'm hearing. So it's that, as I said, I come back to it, that direct engagement with Havant and Portsmouth. Could you comment on that? Has the plan done everything that it could to provide, to quantify that, and to go back and maximise effort in terms of providing for it?
Thank you, Mum. I'm not wishing to repeat what I've said, but it has done everything that it can, consistent with moving a plan forward, so that we basically have a plan-led system, which is what we're trying all to do, is basically bring forward allocations to make sure we've got 5-year housing land supply, and obviously to have an adopted plan.
Would anybody else like to say anything on this matter?
Before we move a second parts of the council's response.
Oh,
from
I'm sorry.
Mr. Obiak, who
Sorry, would
better
you mind
introduce
turning your nameplate? Thank you very, I'm sorry, that's, sorry, your name,
himself.
your name?
It's Steve Opachik on the City Council.
Opashik,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, could I just sort of go through the process in a bit more detail? First of all, when the first push statement of common ground in 2020, we were in the process of preparing the SIP document, strategic issues and priorities. And obviously we had an overall figure in terms of a snapshot of what the shortfall was. And we didn't ignore that. We responded to it in the SIP consultation. At that time, Push thought all of the unmet needs would be dealt with by what it called strategic development opportunity areas, major strategic allocations, but obviously didn't know where they were or how many would be needed. So they were mentioned in the SIP consultation as something that we may have to do. And that consultation also referred to each of the options for development, the spatial development options, having the potential to have an increased number of houses within them if that was what was required. And I think it's important to say at that time, by February 2021, had submitted a local plan that met their needs and exceeded them by 340. So up until then, didn't have an unmet need. At that stage also, the Portsmouth Reg 18 local plan in September 2021 had a shortfall of 768, and that was going to be met by Fareham, whose local plan had an unmet need allocation specifically for Portsmouth. So in the early stages, there was.
Sorry, was that again in 2021?
That was September 2021,
Thank
the
you.
Portsmouth Reg
Yeah.
18 plan.
Yeah.
So in those early stages, certainly Havant and Portsmouth, as far as we were aware, may be able to meet their needs. But there was an overall figure, and that would be met by the strategic development opportunity areas. It was only after that those shortfalls got bigger in Havant and Portsmouth, although the actual overall figure didn't change that much. It went up and down, but it's been around 10, 20, 12,000. I think on that, it's important to understand how that's going to be dealt with. The figure obviously changed every year because the standard method figure changed. The supply also changed because once you update your supply by a year, some sites drop out that's being developed, others come in. But the big unknown is how that shortfall is going to be met. There are 10 push authorities or 10 local planning authorities within Push. Only Fareham had an advanced local plan at that stage, and it was new local plans that would deal with that shortfall. So we knew what Fareham were doing, but everyone else was in the early stages of plan making. And in the housing topic paper update, in table 3, I set out how those 5 authorities that were expected to be able to exceed their requirement were working on that, and how that plus the strategic sites would actually meet the shortfall or exceed the shortfall that was identified at that time. But it's
Sorry, which table is that?
It's table 3 of
Yeah.
FDO2.
The update.
Pages 18 to 19 of that document. So that looks at those authorities that were expected to take unmet need, if you like. But it's important to understand all the authorities had to produce new local plans which would increase supply. So even those authorities that may end up with a shortfall would be doing a local plan to increase supply. They might not increase it enough to meet their own needs in full, but all 10 authorities, Fareham may have to review their plan, as was understood at that time. All of those authorities will be increasing supply. So, and that is a big unknown. You know, how were we supposed to know at any stage, even now, how much each authority could produce? So you have to say, well, those authorities that are likely to have a shortfall, that will be tested when their local plans come to examination. They'll have to pass the no stone unturned test, if you'd like to call it that. And those that were contributing, like Winchester, would have to make a judgment on whether that contribution was reasonable, realistic, deliverable within the overall scale of need that was identified at the time. So I think for people to say, "Oh, Winchester didn't take account of it," and we did. We've always taken account of it through each stage of the process, but it's actually not possible to produce the right answer for how much Winchester or any other authority should be taking, because there's so many unknowns that it's impossible to tie down.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, your surname, Opiate. Opachik.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Can I just say on this subject, in the representation, the hearing statement from O'Flynn Group, prepared by Litchfield, there's quite a detailed table setting out the various events and obviously constructed to advance their particular case. We have prepared for our own purposes an amended version of that table with our comments side by side with respect to each event. Some of which, but by no means all of which, was just touched upon by Mr. Opachich. If it's helpful, we can produce that table so you've got side by side.
Does it differ from the O'Flynn?
Well, it adds to the O'Flynn. Effectively, it provides rebuttal comments to each of the comment made by O'Flynn in their statement.
Okay. Has anyone else seen that? No.
It's an internal document, so
Okay.
but it's information I think it's useful for you to have, and we can work through it in detail now in this oral format, but you then have the basis of an aid memoir recording what's been said.
Okay, that would be helpful to me. We can get that published on the website, I think, just to be fair to everyone.
I think it's possible that we have some copies. We have 8 copies, I'm told, available, which we can distribute now as we start going through the material.
Okay, I am familiar with it, so I don't want to laboriously go through it, but it would be helpful just to get those, the chronology in my head. Thank you. So this will be going on the website as an examination document. I think it will be ED24.
And whilst that's being distributed, I'll turn, if I may, to Mr. Fox to walk you through it.
Okay.
Thank you. So if we use the left-hand column, if I may, obviously in terms of the date, April to June 2016. So obviously we launched the local plan consultation in 2018.
Yeah.
And obviously the important distinction there is the standard method had replaced obviously the O&I. And obviously in 2018 we started the statement of common ground with push, and obviously the local plan was launched in July. And then basically in 2020 we had a push statement of common ground, and obviously that updated the supply. And obviously that was a moment in time. We thought obviously at that stage that, as Mr. Opachik referred to, obviously that the push were doing what's known as strategic development opportunity areas, but obviously the scale and location of the push unmet need and the SDA was obviously unknown. And as Mr. Opachik said, at that stage, haven't had the surplus of 758. Portsmouth had a shortfall of 669, and the Fareham local plan was proposing 850 towards that unmet need. And obviously their plan has subsequently been adopted, and obviously that's 900 now.
So that's 2020. Okay, yeah.
So in 2021, we were still on the SDOAs, and obviously at that time, obviously the submitted Havant local plan had a surplus of 340, and the Portsmouth obviously had an unmet need of 768, rounded to 1,000 in 2021, which shows how these figures kind of move. And then obviously importantly on the left hand side in terms of October 2021, November 2022, kind of it mentions this figure about plus 2,420. We never agreed as a city council that there was that plus 2,420 basically contribution. That was basically because our area, basically the Southampton urban area, covers a lot of the MDAs, our major development areas in the south of the district. And that's actually was for our need in terms of our adopted local plan. So it was never available to put for our need, which obviously was examined as part of our adopted local plan. And that was obviously rectified basically in the push position statement PHS 07, where there's a footnote added to that table to explain that. And that's why it's 0 later on in PSH 07. And obviously the push assessments for the SDOAs were still ongoing. So we didn't know in 2021, 22 which sites they were. And obviously haven't unfortunately received a negative, obviously, inspector's report in 2021, mainly to do with the deliverability of their sites in basically Havant Town Centre, and obviously haven't withdrew their local plan. So then moving on to December 2022, like I say, basically that 2,420, we added the footnote to the push work to explain that wasn't available to push to avoid any misunderstanding. And obviously at that stage, the unmet need in Havant had considerably increased. At that time, it was basically minus 1,469. And Portsmouth obviously, again, kind of increased to 2,481, which again reflects the standard methodology, the changes and nature of obviously the housing numbers. So in September 2023, we did recognise that there was a significant shortfall in push, and we looked to increase the buffer, basically, which is obviously in the Reg 19 local plan. And as I mentioned, we just felt pragmatically that we couldn't go backwards to look at obviously alternative strategy, because you would need to literally go back to the SIP stage and we wouldn't basically produce a plan. And then obviously moving on to December 2023, obviously we had the push spatial position statement, but obviously as a gate, it identified broad areas, but gave no detail about what those areas should be. And clearly with Land East of Botley, it is in multiple ownerships. There's no master plan, there's no traffic modelling, nothing to do with basically how we could actually anticipate what could come forward. But we do recognise that it is an area that we will be looking at in the next local plan. Then obviously in March 2024, we had obviously the formal requests from Portsmouth and Havant. But importantly, obviously, it's not only us to meet obviously any unmet need. It's obviously there are other neighbours in this kind of relationship. And obviously we include what we feel is a substantial figure, the 1,900, which we think could be available, and obviously mixed with a development strategy that we consulted on in the SIP. And that's important to say that obviously we consulted different development strategies in the SIP. We got responses about how we should do, and that's how we've moved forward. And kind of finally, it's to reiterate, it's never been possible to define precisely what the unmet need figure is across push. And I think it's very interesting that a lot of the hearing statements say you should have tested a higher growth option, but nobody has actually said what that higher growth option should be, because nobody can actually nail down a figure to say what that figure is. So for us to say you should have tested it, well, what figure should we test? 10%, 20%? It's very difficult and be subjective. And there is no, and it's not a simple answer of authority A having the shortfall of X, therefore authority B is the only place it can accommodate. It's not that simple. I wish it was that simple, but it's not. And needs and supply are constantly changing, as are local plans. Like I say, now there's much more of an impetus by our neighbours to get on with their local plans, which is good because they will bring forward allocations. And to reiterate, obviously the spatial position statement could not apportion the needs to specific authorities. And that's really important in terms of what the spatial position statement actually says. It has a global figure about what could contribute towards it. So we've taken what we think is a reasonable and pragmatic approach. and trying to move the plan forward, really.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Fox. Okay, could I just, I just want responses. We've had a detailed chronology that's actually been very helpful, Mr. Fox. Could I just go around the table, Mr. Warren, please, for O'Flynn?
Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry, would you mind when I ask people to speak, if I don't say who you're representing, would you mind?
Oh, yes, absolutely, Madam. Rupert Warren, KC, instructed by Mr. Matthew Spry, who's sitting to my right.
Thank you.
Of Lichfield, for O'Flynn. The new document, ma'am, obviously we've been trying to follow as that went along. I won't complain about when it was produced, but there may be something that we need to say a little bit later on in the day, having digested it, since it's a commentary on one of our parts of our evidence. But I just note that. Ma'am, can I just begin our response to the points that have been made by cutting to the chase, if you like, the legal requirement. I think you got to the nub of it, really, ma'am, with one of your earlier questions, which is, I paraphrase, why didn't you go back in late 23, 24 to retest higher numbers? And we haven't had, with great respect, a decent answer to that from the authority in writing or today. The duty is on the authority to demonstrate, obviously, that they've undertaken this process, not just spoken, not just participated in PFSH push, but they've done so in order to maximise the effectiveness of the plan, this plan, not another plan in a few years' time, this plan. And that's not that goes to soundness, obviously, but it's not just a matter of soundness, ma'am. As you know, it's a legal requirement which bites on the date of the submission. And the guidance that you've been given, that we all operate under in the framework and the PPG, asks authorities to show that all reasonable efforts have been made to meet the unmet needs of housing of their neighbours. Whether you call it no stone unturned or any other paraphrase that you want to, that's the exercise that is at the heart of maximising the effectiveness of this plan in relation to housing. And the only other general point I make before I come to some of the details that have been raised is that we've heard already in writing, again, I see in one of the read comments in the column, mention of the word pragmatism, which is often used, perhaps maybe used at these local plan examinations. One can always say, let's have a plan, it's better than not having a plan. But that actually isn't the question, the statutory question that's asked. So that's a common sense point, yes, and there may be relevant matters to take into account. But actually, the reason why we always start with this session is there is a legal requirement to maximise the effectiveness of this plan through engagement with neighbours. And if that hasn't happened, then with the best will in the world and being sympathetic to local authorities, it's not a good plan. And I'll have to start again. And that really is the position that I'm afraid we're in today. So may I just come to some of the details of it? So it is important to understand, and you've already heard some of the figures, what it means here in Winchester and in Hampshire to maximise the effectiveness of this plan. And that's not just to meet the standard method as operative, ma'am, but to try and meet the unmet needs of neighbours. We know that's a crucial bit of maximising the effectiveness of the plan. And what we have is the 1900 allowance or contribution, but that's against something that we all know in the room, a very, very much bigger level of unmet need. And we know that in December 2023, when the position statement of PFSH was published, we'll see Winchester key participants in that process, that figure was 11,700 units of unmet need. But it's risen, and you have our table and the tables of others, 18,000 in our table 1 that you've seen in our position statement, and you've seen, because of the state of play with the other authorities, that they're not transitional plans, they're going to have to meet the new standard needs. Actually, the needs are very much greater, and you've seen 30,000 plus figures, which are relevant considerations for you to take into account. There's also the question of which neighbours. This is a minor point, but it's actually quite important, I think. In our statement, we've identified that the push position statement identifies those authorities that you've heard about in the council's duty to cooperate statement, and New Forest and Gosport. But they're neighbouring authorities as far as push is concerned, and they've got unmet needs running to 6,000-7,000 in total, a large amount of additional unmet need that we don't hear at all about in the work of the authority on SDO6. In fact, when you look at SDO6, ma'am, and you don't need to go there, but the paragraph reference is 3.2. In that document, it appears that those authorities have been excluded from the work of DTC that Winchester has done, which is
Sorry, which authorities?
Gosport and New Forest.
Okay.
And we've given you those, that they're part of our build-up of the 18,000 in our table 1. And they are PFSH neighbouring authorities as far as PFSH itself is concerned. And there's an inconsistency, I'm just flagging, between PFSH and SDO6 in that respect. So grappling with the unmet needs in order to maximise effectiveness means grappling with this very large number. 9,000 large number, 11,700 large number, 18,000 large. They're all very large numbers. And yes, they vary. I'll come to this point in a bit more detail in a moment. They all vary, but they all share one common characteristic. They're very big. And the question that you asked, why didn't you go back and test? That could be put a slightly different way. Why didn't you go back and test a very big additional number? You could choose, it's your plan. You could choose 7, you could choose 9, you could choose 11, you could choose 18, or all of them. None of them has been done. And that, as I say, goes back to the nub of the point that you raised. As what we've heard, ma'am, today and in the statements from Winchester are 3 basic reasons why they didn't go back. And can I just spend a moment on each? 3 basic reasons why they didn't go back. The first is delay that it would cause to this plan. That comes to the pragmatism point. The second is the 1900 fitting with the strategy. And the third is, where's the jelly? It's fluid, can't tell what the number is. So those are the 3 points. None of them really, unfortunately, stands up to any sort of critical analysis. In terms of delay, the relevant reference, ma'am, for your note is SD10G, that's the housing topic paper, paragraphs 4.38 to 39. And Mr. Fox paraphrased it or touched on it in something he said earlier on today. And that's at that moment when the authority is considering how to proceed, and it sets out that that was in July 24, if you remember. That's when they decided that in order to go back and look at a larger number or additional sites, or even the site that PFSH East of Botley had recommended to them, it would mean basically going back and looking at other reasonable alternatives and starting again. So that's when it was done, July 2024. But that it was obviously, as I've already indicated, a choice that was made flatly contrary to the duty on the authority that they have to discharge, which is to maximise the effectiveness of the plan. Though the conversations and the testing were not done earlier, and of course they weren't done at that point for the reason that was given. They should have reappraised at that stage, but they didn't go beyond the 1900. So the second, that was delay, not a good reason, just not a good reason. False economy, if you like, is often put in these cases. Will it really lead to less planning by appeal? Well, not really, if you think about it, because the plan will be adopted. Well, there'll be these gargantuan other numbers and amounts of unmet need as material considerations on all applications in Section 78. So it's really a mirage at the point that we need to get a plan through so that we're safe from applications and appeals when you think about it in this context. Completely unrealistic. But anyway, delay, not a good reason. Second point, ma'am, was what about the strategy? The 1900s, all the strategy could allow? And that goes back, again, for your note, ma'am, to July 2024, core document SD, 10G. That's the housing topic paper, paragraph 4.52. And I think we heard just a touch of it a moment ago from the council, that what actually happened here was that in Regulation 18, in the SIP process, there was consultation about large potential, option 3, I think it was, at that stage, large sites, and there was a negative reaction to that. And at that point, the council decided that that was not going to be part of its strategy. So at that point, so back in 2022, the authority effectively bound its own hands in relation to what the strategy was. So what you're hearing in relation to this second main justification is we didn't go back and reappraise larger numbers because they didn't fit with our strategy. But of course, ma'am, the fallacy of that in a local plan process will be obviously immediate to you. It's saying, well, we can't do a proper strategy because we've already got a strategy. It's the wrong strategy. It should have been reappraised again in 2024 at the very latest in order to see whether the plan could be maximised in relation to the unmet needs of neighbours. And so we don't have, and we'll come to this later, ma'am, any assessment work or integrated sustainability appraisal work beyond the 14 or 15,000 units that you've seen. Nothing elevating it by 5 or 7 or 10 or 15 or whatever it may be to test whether Winchester, which is a lot less constrained, as you know, than many of the authorities that we're concerned about to the south, could do more. Just wasn't done. So that local strategy that had been set, the hands that had been bound back in 18, constrained the authority, it would appear, prevented it from taking a proper approach to setting back the clock and having another go in 2024. But the other point on strategy, ma'am, is the PFSH. That's where you started, I think, with your questions. Is that the strategy, if you like, that's guiding the approach here? Does that give you a basis for not looking at these much bigger numbers? And the answer is no, it doesn't, for a couple of reasons. For a start, its status is obviously as part of this ongoing process. It doesn't have any formal status, but there are some important things that come from it. Obviously, the tracking of these very big numbers of unmet need. So 11,700 odd in 2024. In its position statement in December, at 5.6, ma'am, of that position statement, I think that's PSH 01. It says that given those big numbers, the needs should be met where possible. Needs should be met where possible. That's the overall position statement approach. And in so doing, it recommends that a combination of strategic and smaller sites is employed in each of the local plans. So, of course, just setting that against what we've had since from Winchester, we haven't had an assessment of further strategic sites to get up to any of these bigger numbers. But the authority relies, and it says, I think, actually in EDO2, that it was instrumental, Winchester was instrumental, I think that's the word that's used, in this two-stage approach. It sounds methodical, etc. Of course, what it actually is precisely what Winchester knows it is, which is why Mr. Fraser-Urquhart in his opening said, we're not kicking the can down the road. Of course they are, because that's what the two-stage approach is. We'll do a little bit if we can now, and then these strategic sites there for another plan. Now, as soon as you set that against, are you maximising the effectiveness of this plan, one realises that it's just an abdication, a corporate and joint abdication of their responsibilities to meet the needs this time round. And so what it also means, ma'am, that PFSH position statement, is that it fails to require, in terms the testing and meeting of those numbers in local plans like this one going forward. And its broad areas go a little way, but don't go very far. But the irony, ma'am, just before I finish on this particular point, the irony of what we've had here in Winchester is they were instrumental, they tell us, in the two-stage strategy. That refers in the PFSH document to a site east of Botley in Winchester. Sounds promising, one might think, as a way forward. Did Winchester then test that site? Did they test that site, despite having been the progenitors, apparently, of this two-stage process? Now, no, because it would have taken too long. It would have taken too long. So they didn't even do the thing that this strategy exercise indicated that they should do. So a complete failure, frankly, of a joint enterprise. So it's simply being used to justify delay and pushing these difficult decisions about large sites through to the next plan. And just before I could turn to the last point about fluidity of the numbers, it's often said, and I think you may have said it, and it's right, the duty to cooperate isn't a duty to agree, but it's also not a duty to agree not to do anything. It's not a duty to agree not to do anything. And that's what effectively, ma'am, you'll see, that's what we've got with the PFSH conversation. The final point, ma'am, I just can't, the third of the justifications is about the fluidity, how difficult it is to work out the number. If I mean, not a brilliant analogy, forgive me, but it has some, I think, relevance here. The height of the tsunami has varied a bit over time. That's what we're dealing with here. It's always been a very big number. So to say, well, the plans are coming forward at different times, that's true always. It's true across the country for every authority. Neighbours are coming forward at different times. That's because we don't have proper sub-regional planning bounds, That's the position. But you've got to deal with it. And here, it wasn't as if it was 0 and then no surplus and then 200, 4,000, very big numbers all the way through this period. And the failure to grapple with just a sensible, we'll test 5, we'll test 10, to see whether it could be done, reject it maybe. That's absolutely the heart of the problem that we've got with this submission plan. So, ma'am, I don't have very much more to say, but it has escalated that number. And as we'll come to when we look at the SA, there wasn't any testing at all of a number.
Okay, we'll get on to that. I don't want to deal
Yes.
with the SA now.
And the final point, ma'am, is I think I heard no outstanding issues with any of the other authorities. You'll obviously have seen the Portsmouth City Council statement of common ground, which refers to the interaction with the inspectorate and where Winchester have gone in terms of meeting, I think it's 15% of the unmet need figure for Portsmouth, the bit of the 1900 that Winchester hypothecated, as it were, to Portsmouth. That is another, it's a lot more than a trailing, a thread, a loose thread. That is just a glimpse of the fact that even though the PFSH authorities have agreed to say not very much and to push things, no pun intended, to the next plan stage, Portsmouth can't quite get there. They're saying, can we have a bit more about why you're not taking more of our need?
Although they have signed the statement of common ground.
But that's in it.
Yeah.
The statement of common ground includes, perhaps, it's not so unusual these days, but some indications that all is not entirely rosy in the garden.
Okay.
So, ma'am, it's for those 3 points. The justification for not having gone back, not all of them, none of them is a decent justification, which is why the plan fails the duty.
Thank you very much, Mr. Warren. Could I turn to Ms. Mulliner?
Thank you, ma'am. Yes, Jacqueline Mulliner for Blenheim and Vargate Homes. Thank you. The sequence of events is clearly important for this, and what was described by Winchester in this case is all well before the Reg 19 consultation. And so there was an opportunity to look again at the strategy and at the accommodation of unmet need, given the scale of need and the common theme that scale of need was only doing one thing, and that was to increase. So that sequence was important, but also then our understanding and evidence of what discussions then took place, which hasn't been recorded in terms of meeting notes and understanding that the authorities were talking about that scale of unmet need after December 2023, when the spatial position statement and Partnership for South Hampshire statement of common ground was signed. There's no indication then of what took place in terms of discussing what other options other than the SGOs could be accommodated to meet the need. So what the scale of that need was, and how the strategy should be amended to try and address more of that need in the interim period. And I say that the sites are important. There was a proportionate split in the allowance after the Reg 19 stage as proposed by the modifications. But actually, the strategy is only based on the Winchester need. The allowance is a result of a buffer. But the sites are important because the South Hampshire area only affects the southern part of the district. That's the housing market area relating to the partnership area. And so where the need is going to be met is actually really, really important to the issue. The strategy wasn't amended. It wasn't amended, which means that it doesn't meet the duty to cooperate because nobody knows where the unmet need is going to be provided for. The strategy just wasn't amended. It's a Winchester district needs strategy only, not a strategy that deals with both Winchester's need and a separate and completely distinct, geographically based unmet need for the partnership area.
Is that the duty issue or is it a soundness issue?
I think it's probably both in terms of the effectiveness under the duty, knowing where those sites are. A similar, I think, in the Shropshire local plan, a similar issue arose for the backcountry need. You have to understand in the Shropshire local plan examination in terms of understanding where that need would be accommodated given the geographical influences. And so I think, I mean, we will come to the numbers ultimately, probably under soundness, but I will say just with the South Downs National Park Authority, which effectively wipes out the buffer, the allowance, well, if you like to call it anyway.
We'll come on to that. I've got a specific question on that.
Okay, but I think ultimately the whole approach is encapsulated in the lack of reference in the objectives of the plan to meet unmet needs. It just doesn't exist. It's not part of the objectives. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Young, Law Holmes.
Thank you very much, Madam. Yeah, Blore Holmes, instructed by Rebecca Fentrip of Blores. So last month, Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole Council received a letter from their two inspectors, Helen Hockenhall and Thomas Hatfield, specifically with reference to the duty to cooperate, specifically saying this in paragraph 3, with reference to the duty to cooperate, paragraph 26 of the same framework, that's the same framework you're looking at, the December 23 version, states, and I quote, effective and ongoing joint working between strategic plan-making authorities and relevant bodies is integral to the production of a positively prepared and justified strategy. In particular, joint working should determine whether development needs that cannot be met wholly within a particular plan area could be met elsewhere. And they found the plan failed the duty to cooperate. On that point about unmet need, interestingly, you referred to pragmatism. That word was used by the now deceased Secretary of State, James Brokenshire, back in 2015. Your Chief Executive, Paul Morrison, has replied to the new Minister, Matthew Pennycook, with specific regard to that phrase, and in particular, the fact we've moved away from it. We have unquestionably left the era of overriding pragmatism, which was in all instances and in many, many occasions used as a justification not to do the job properly. And we have moved to an era of effectiveness, which is exactly what your fellow inspectors in respect of the Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole plan focused on. They focused on whether the plan is effective. I'm not the first, and I certainly won't be the last to say you hit the nail on the head with reference to why didn't you go back? We've had continual reference to, well, it's difficult and the numbers change. Of course the numbers change. The numbers change every time there's an affordability adjustment. But that's not an answer to deal with the problem. Oh, well, it's just too difficult because the numbers change. What you should be doing is looking at how you can help deal with what are unquestionably, on anybody's maths, large numbers, and seeing how you can do that. Nobody is saying that they have to meet all the unmet need from the partnership area, but have they demonstrated an effective way of seeking to address that? No, nothing like. And if I may, I just reiterate the scale of what we're talking about here. This isn't 500 houses like you sometimes get. Our submissions from Savills point to an unmet need figure of over 41,000 homes. The only time I've seen a figure like that before was in the Birmingham plan. And on that occasion, 14 authorities turned up in the examination room and explained their position to the inspector. Looking around the room, I can't see one other local authority here in this room, unless I'm misreading the number plate. It was intriguing. I came in with officers from Portsmouth Council, and the people downstairs were absolutely insistent they couldn't sit in this room. They wanted and repeatedly asked if they could sit in this room, and they were ushered to some other room. So you're sat here without any representatives from the other local authorities, which is bizarre, if I may say so. But what we know is all of those areas have large, significant amounts of unmet need, and there's been no proper engagement with them to the point where they're not even in this room, even as observers. Of course, they should have gone back, and they should have worked far more effectively. Why didn't they go back? Because they didn't want to go back. They didn't want to face the reality of it. The issue in these cases is not about having a plan. Your fellow inspector, Kevin Ward, one of the more robust inspectors, I must say so, throughout his career in terms of local plan work, has used the phrase, as he did in the Warwick local plan, a review does not make an unsound plan sound. It just doesn't. And let's have a look at the track record of delivering effective plans in this country over the last 5 years. Over 60 authorities suspended their plans, didn't progress them, and there is no statutory provision that requires a local authority that says it's going to do a review to do a review. There was a court case about this, Dacorum Council and Grand Union, and I did an inquiry in Dacorum 10 years after the promise to the local plan inspector and to the High Court judge. Mr. Kingston, acting for Dacorum Council, promised the High Court judge they would need to get on with the review. They never got on with the review. We still haven't seen that review over a decade. So let's not pretend that, we can make all this fine by some subsequent review. The scale of the problem is enormous, but just to fit that into a wider issue, you are, as we all are, under specific instruction from this government to see 1.5 million homes delivered, built by clients such as mine by July 2029, which is the end of the parliamentary period. That is obviously 300,000 a year, but it's an all parliament figure. Last year, for the last set of statistics that cover a lot of the first year of Labour's office, 235,000 were delivered. That's 65,000 short. The actual figure, even if every authority met their need, the standard meth figure only adds up to 370,000. Mr. Spry had a hand in that, as did others. They're going to have to hit 370,000 for each year that they stick at 235,000, which is the prediction for next year and so on. So we need to be delivering around 370,000 homes a year in 2028, 2029, probably 2027. It helps nobody to achieve that if what we're going to have is lots of authorities saying, let's have a plan. The continuation of it, actually, the end date of this plan continuing well beyond that election period, based on the wrong numbers. It needs to be based on the right numbers, and anything else isn't planning effectively. It might have been planning pragmatically, but that era is over. It's not helping anybody. We need every authority to meet their standard method figure. And if they can't, they need to find neighbours who will find that. And until those neighbours take that need, and that's all that Kevin Ward was doing 10 years ago, what he was saying was, I'm not going to let Warwick, you have your plan, which meets your needs, until you, Warwickshire authorities, have dealt with Coventry's unmet need, the main urban areas. But it's far worse here than Coventry because they've got the South Coast, not really the fault of any authority, but they can't. I did an inquiry recently in Southampton. They deliver virtually no affordable housing. They're losing affordable housing. They're delivering city centre flats, but these don't deliver affordable housing. and huge, enormous amounts of housing is not being built. Is it better to have this plan? No, it's better to have a plan that is effective, and the planning by appeal is a reality, but nothing motivates an authority more than losing appeals and losing cost decisions. What we need is a proper plan that deals with a proper amount of that need, and the authorities cooperate. It only took the Warwickshire authorities 6 months to deal with Coventry's unmet needs when the inspectors stood up and said, no, you need to deal with their need. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Young. Okay. Council, you've heard what's been said. Have you got any response? Please don't repeat what you've already said, but you've heard the nub of it.
Yes, there's just one or two observations
Yeah.
I want to make. Dealing first of all with what Mr. Warren said. And I just
So
want
that's
to
the three reasons he
the three reasons, and I
Yeah.
particularly want to deal with this issue of delay and pragmatism
Yeah.
within the context of what you're considering now, which is the duty to
Okay,
cooperate.
can you pick up on some of the points that Mr. Young said as well when you're dealing with pragmatism? Thank you, Mr. Young.
I will. It is worth just examining the wording of section 33A with which you're concerned. Section 1, each person who is a local planning authority must cooperate with every other person, etc., in maximising the effectiveness with which activities within subsection 3 are undertaken. And the activities in subsection 3 are the preparation of development plan documents. So the statutory requirement is cooperation in maximising the effectiveness in the preparation of development plan documents. So it's not merely a case of talking about effectiveness within the soundness tests, but it's also that process of the preparation of development plan documents. And we say that that fully encompasses your ability to have regard to the effectiveness of the process of development plan preparation, which again is not simply a matter of maximising, even in the current environment, is not simply a matter of maximising the number of houses which are built. They have to be properly planned. They have to be delivered in a sustainable way with a sustainable development strategy which has been tested. And so it isn't simply enough to say, oh, well, you can't talk about pragmatism anymore and it's the era of pragmatism is gone. The statutory wording directs you, we would say, to have regard to those wider issues. And I'm not going to repeat all the evidence that we've had before.
Yeah. With
respect to Mr. Young's submissions, it's not, in my submission, terribly helpful to refer you to 10-year-old situations or a horror story from Decorum. What we do say are two things. First of all, this plan is being examined under the transitional provisions that the government itself set out, knowing full well that there were going to be authorities who were going to face a very significant increase in their housing requirements as a result of the new NPPF, but had reached a particular stage in preparation. And that is the decision that Winchester took to move forward in those circumstances as sanctioned by the NPPF. We've committed to a policy within the local plan, as you've seen, to ensure the review comes forward. The local development strategy has already been amended and it envisages beginning work in July of this year, before even this plan is adopted, as we expect it to be. And so it is inappropriate, really, to try and say, oh, well, you can't have regard to the review. It's the mechanism the government provided. It's already positive steps taken by this authority to deal with it. So, Mum, I think those are the
Okay,
particular points of rebuttal I wanted to make to,
okay,
to
just
what
need
we've
to be
heard.
very clear about soundness issues, which maybe review or not, and the duty issues. Okay, unless anybody has a burning desire to say anything else, very quickly.
Yes, it's just a reference, actually, ma'am.
Yeah.
Nothing really more than that. Milena Friend was talking about maximise effectiveness and so on. You've got the framework. You've also got the advice in the PPG, which I know you're aware of.
Yeah.
61-22, which goes again to the heart of what we're dealing with here. Explore all the options and meet the needs, except where they would have adverse effects. And the problem here is, were Winchester sitting here and saying, we've done that, and look, there'd be trouble with this constraint and flooding and that constraint and so on. We can't meet any more of those needs than 1900. We wouldn't be having this debate. The problem is they haven't tested the numbers at all.
Okay. Does the council want to respond on that point?
I think you have my point about
Okay.
the wider duty.
Mr. Young?
Yeah, again, just respecting the integrity of the process, just 1 minute, if I may, which is just to this point about, well, the government have allowed a review to take place. That's a national-wide policy. One needs to look at the circumstances of each authority and the scale of the unmet need. And in this case, the scale of the unmet need is so enormous that it needs to be addressed as soon as possible, not put off to another date. And even if there is the ability to have a review, you can attach, I would suggest, limited weight to something which is not specifically required within a particular time period, none of which, of course, helps achieve the 1.5 million by 2029. And I just reiterate Mr. Warren's point, because it's such an important point. The work hasn't been done. We've got gaps between Regulation 18 and 19. How can you have gaps when you're trying to deal with such as enormous figures and say, well, we didn't really engage then, but the work hasn't even been done. And so why? And no answer was provided, because there is no answer, because there is no work, because they haven't done it, because they haven't been looking to be effective.
Okay, thank you.
May I just respond
Okay,
on that? Obviously, Mr. Young has said we don't accept at all, and you'll hear in detail about the work that has been done. So to say we haven't answered the issue of work being done, we say that we have, and you will increasingly hear from it. Just one final point I would like to make, if I may, and that is the suggestion that Mr. Warren made about there wasn't really any difference between having a local plan in place and planning by appeal, because the unmet need would be a material consideration. Well, with respect, we disagree with that. Clearly, if you've got a plan, you've got a framework, you have one side of the balancing exercise of plan compliance versus material considerations in place. And we say there is a world of difference between the two, which is why we've taken the policy choices to proceed as we have.
I understand that point. Okay, thank you. It's now 11:45. I'm getting confused with that clock. 11:45, isn't it? It's not. It's nearly 10 to 12. Let's take a break until 12:10, and then we'll come back. It's now 12:10, and this hearing is resumed. Okay.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but may I just, there's one point I'd just like to make, if I may, arising out of something that came out procedurally out of the last session, about which I've received some rather aggrieved instruction over the break. And it's this suggestion made in Mr. Young's submissions that the officers from Portsmouth had, for some reason, not been allowed into this room. That's absolutely not the case. What happened was that those who had not registered to speak initially were invited to wait in the overflow room until it was clear that there would be space to accommodate them in this room. And that's what happened. And so Mr. Young may have seen people he was expecting to see come into this room, not come into this room initially, but they were all, as you would of course expect in a public forum, invited and allowed to come up. We understand that a couple of people decided that the overflow room was more comfortable, so they stayed down there. But I'm also told that during Mr. Young's submissions, there were officers from Portsmouth in the room listening to what he said. So
Okay,
in case there's any confusion, I just wanted to clear that up.
okay, thank you for that. I doesn't need a response. Thank you. Okay. Let's move straight on to the essay, IIA. I've put a general question there, but I want to considerably narrow that down. And let's not rehearse a lot of the discussion that we had before the break. So we know you carried out an IIA. That included an essay that accorded with SCA. And in that, you tested a number of options. There were 5 options. Sorry, I'm just turning to my notes. Sorry, there were 5 options, and it's clear in your evidence, 5 options that you considered. You first of all discounted option 3, that was new settlement, and that was discounted. And then there were another 3. First of all, first one was based on the existing strategy. Second one was to focus on Winchester itself and other larger sustainable settlements. And then the other one was to disperse development around the district largely in proportion to the size of existing settlements. And then through that process, you came up with a variation, which is option 1A, which had the effect of increasing numbers in Winchester town and Market Town rural areas. Now, we've already heard, and I want to pick up on this, what you didn't do is test an option, and we heard it from, who was it, O'Flynn Group. You didn't test a higher number, and we heard, and it's a valid point, well, we know you didn't know the exact number, but what you did know is that it was a big number. Tell me, why didn't you test the higher option as part of that process, as part of the IIA, please?
If I may start, within the SIP document, we did ask for comments on basically, are there any other options? So we did leave it open, that there was the opportunity to comment on other options, and clearly, as a result of that,
That was in SIP, was it?
that was in the SIP consultation, and clearly, as a result of that public consultation, which led to the hybrid kind of option, if I call that 1A, which basically identified some settlements that basically could accommodate development, which had a range of facilities that weren't basically identified in the adopted local plan to accommodate development. So there are Otterwell and places like that that basically in the new kind of settlement hierarchy that could accommodate development. So there was the opportunity to basically comment on different options, and obviously, interestingly, obviously, you know, there was not overwhelmingly at that stage SIP consultation, basically people saying, well, you should do this or whatever, because we would have reported it, but that wasn't the case. All of those outcomes from the SIP consultation were reported to, at the time, the Local Plan Advisory Group, which was basically minutes of that are available on the website. So like I say, there was every opportunity to comment on another option. But obviously we didn't consult on another option because at that time of the SIP document, we were under the impression that particularly Havant would meet their own need. So there was no reason to test an option basically. And we were based on the information.
But you knew that there was an outstanding need, didn't you? And you knew that was quite a big need. Would that not have you? I mean, okay, nobody came forward as a result of the consultation, but you could have done that yourself, taken the decision to test another option.
In theory, you could test another option. The key was, what could you test it with? Because all the options in the SIP documents basically try to quantify, obviously, what the option would be. Because people will say, well, you're asking us for an option on a higher number. What higher number? What do you actually mean? And obviously, that's the problem, that we didn't have a number that we felt was robust and defendable that we could put in the SIP document to test. But Andrew
Okay.
make a comment.
Sorry, Ms. Scott. So you're saying that there wasn't a quantified figure, and therefore, sorry, I don't want to put words into your mouth, but you're saying therefore it wouldn't have been a reasonable alternative.
I think if you go, my colleagues from LUC will comment, but obviously to be a reasonable alternative, you've got to have something that is tangible difference in terms of basically to meet the requirements of reasonable alternatives, and LUC may wish to expand on that point.
Yes, I think it'd be useful to hear from LUC, from Mr. Pearson, Jonathan Pearson, who's the Associate Director.
LUC, okay,
Who are the consultants who prepared
From Lock.
the.
okay. Do you
Just-
say LUC or LOC?
LUC.
LUC.
Just within the context of understanding the relationship
Okay,
between a
thank you.
particular number and the testing sustainability
Thank you, Mr.
process.
Yes. Yeah, so just to that point, as you outlined, the SIP described a number of different spatial options, and the IIA tested those, and then
Yeah.
subsequent to that, there was a hybrid option which the IIA then also tested. The SIP also set out that all of those spatial options were capable of accommodating extra growth. It actually says that explicitly in the SIP document. And you've got to remember that the IAA of spatial strategy options is a very sort of top-down process. And given the fact that any of those options were identified as being capable of accommodating extra growth if necessary, to have tested, there was no other kind of spatial option on the table. I mean, one of the options that we did test was option 3, which I know was subsequently dismissed, but that was tested through the IAA, which was for one or more completely new settlements.
But was that the same level of growth?
So sorry. My point I was sort of coming to was that had that sort of spatial concept been tested with a higher number, it wouldn't have actually led to the IAA identifying any different significant effects, because it would have been the differentiation between the different options comes almost entirely from spatial differences. So, if we've already tested a spatial option, the principle of one or more completely new strategic allocations. So that has been tested, and that's provided a top-down testing. And at the same time, of course, we did all the bottom-up testing of all known reasonable alternative individual site options, and there was over 400 of those. So if you get to the point where you decide you need to allocate additional growth, then the sites that would comprise some future sites have also already been tested through the IAA. And there's a map, well, there's a series of maps in chapter 4 of the IAA which shows the spread of those sites, reasonable alternative sites that were put forward across the district, including in the area to the east of Botley, which was sort of talked about a bit earlier.
Yeah.
So all those sites, the effects of potentially allocating all those sites have also been tested through the IAA.
Sorry, I might have missed something, Mr. Pearson, but sorry, but I need to test my understanding. So you're saying that option 3 included new settlement, new strategic sites?
Yes, in principle. But it didn't say, the option didn't go to the level of detail of saying, and that those settlements would be in a particular location.
No, but what about the numbers that were tested? Were any numbers associated with these options?
Well, the options under consideration at the time were, at the time of the SIP, the SIP was only talking about meeting the needs of the district itself, and it was deferring consideration of meeting unmet needs to the push work, the bunch for South Hampshire work, coming up with a strategy to deal with that. So yes, so there was a kind of 14,000, I think, total dwellings over the plan period at the time of the SIP. But as I said, also the view that those spatial distributions was, they're pretty high level things, and they were capable of accommodating extra growth if that was needed later on in the process.
Okay, I'm really sorry, but did you test a higher growth
Well,
option?
at the later stages, the council then made an allowance for contributing towards unmet needs. So at that time, that was built into the emerging draft plan, and that was tested at the
Okay.
Reg 18 and Reg 19 stages.
Okay, I understand. So of course, so it went up from 14,000 to 19,000, but it was LHN plus and that additional figure, and that's what was tested. The spatial distribution of which was in these options 1 to 5.
Yes.
Okay, I understand that. Anybody else want to say anything from the council? I understand that point. Okay, can I turn to the table because I know what people around the table are saying. Mr. O'Flynn Group have touched on it. Could I just say around the table, please could you make your contributions short so that we just and focused, not necessarily short, but focused so that we stick to time. Mr. Warren?
Thank you very much, ma'am. I'll try to do that. You'll need to go to understand whether what's been said is any kind of answer to the question that you asked. You need to go to the essay itself, SD02A. You needn't go there right now, ma'am, obviously, but SD02A.
Yeah.
And there are two particular paragraphs which cast light on what you've just been told. One is 4.117, which is on page 153 of the document, and this is under the heading to provide housing, so the objective to provide housing of a decent standard. You'll note that the objective is to provide housing of a decent standard to meet needs in the district. That's the heading, the objective. And as I think was said, it makes very clear 4117 that the question of the big unmet needs of other authorities towards the south, I quote it, are to be considered under the quote duty to cooperate. So that's not a part, as you've seen, of the SA. That's a completely separate document. So this point number one is this 4.117 signposts very clearly that those big unmet needs elsewhere in the area are not part of what is being tested against Objective 6. So that's the first point. Just as a matter of fact, important to get that right. The other key paragraph, it seems to us, ma'am, in the same section of the same document, 4.127. So this is the option 3, one or more new strategic allocations stroke new settlements. And as I hope came out clearly, ma'am, I'm not sure it did, but what this does is look at an approach to where to put, how to meet the need that's in the district that's been identified. Consistent with 4.117, what it doesn't do is say we could have one or more new strategic allocations, and in so doing, we could thereby meet another 5 or 7 or 10,000 units of unmet need elsewhere. Yeah. Very, very clear. So the point that there's some wriggle room or flexibility in what was tested just doesn't, as a matter of fact, address the point that you've been asking about. Okay. So it doesn't deal with it. So just other two very short points in response to what we heard. Again, we heard, but this time specifically in the SA context, what higher number were we supposed to test? And that's a question that obviously there's some guidance given by the emerging, changing over time, big numbers that were there in the work that PFSH were doing. But it's for the authority to, a body like LUC can say, well, there are big numbers here. So should we test 5 or 7 or 10 and just see what it looks like? See what environmental effects would be, social effects would be, as a reasonable alternative, because we're under a duty to try and meet needs from elsewhere. So that what higher number should we test? Nobody's suggested one. This isn't an answer, with great respect to what a local authority just does on these occasions. It's been done many other places around the country, as you know. Just made an assumption about how big a number to test and see how it came out. And the final point on that is the suggestion I think that was made. I may have got this wrong. Forgive me if I have. That option 3, in a sense, told you the same kind of thing, gave you the same kind of answer as you get if you've done this other exercise. Now, when you look at the ticks and crosses and, you know, totting up of all these options and seen, for instance, how many ticks or pluses a particular option gets, for instance, for meeting housing and affordable housing needs, it just can't, with great respect, be the case that testing, for instance, 5 or 7 or 10 or 15,000 additional units would be the same as the outputs of testing option 3. It simply cannot be right. It'd be better in some instances, no doubt, and worse in some others. It would be quite different. And that's what we haven't got.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Warren. Ms. Mulliner?
Thank you, Mark. I mean, that's exactly it. I mean, the fact that there were no other spatial options on the table, and it goes back to the point that the only options that were ever tested were to meet Winchester's need. And the fact of the matter is that the buffer was then repurposed as an unmet need allowance. But the point is, there's never been a spatial option tested which actually addresses the unmet need resulting from the South Hampshire area. And given the spatial and geographical significance of that, it does need to be looked at separately as a discrete requirement, rather than just a repurposing of something spread across the district as a whole.
Thank you, Ms. Mulliner. Mr. Gately? Law? Is that law? Thank you.
That's correct, Mark. Thank you, John Gately, on behalf of Law Homes. It was just to draw back to the practical implications of this assessment, which is that of the entire housing provided for within the plan of 15,000, we end up with, yes, on face value, about a third of the total being at Winchester. But we submit that's an irrationally low figure, entirely deficient. To be more specific, the 1,410 provided for is barely 2 years worth of the 676. And we simply ask the question, does that bear any relationship with the objectives of the integrated impact assessment, all of which come back to the ability to promote social, economic, environmental sustainability, focusing on, okay, where is the population, where are the services, where are the transportation links? Winchester is a preeminent city, not only of the district itself, but arguably of much of Hampshire. And we say that is where we've landed at is the wrong place and fundamentally unsound and cannot be said to meet the requirements of sustainability.
Okay, you've actually jumped on to my next question. I was going to ask you about that because you made reps on that. Okay, thank you, Mr. Gately. Mr. Young?
Yeah, just briefly. So as has already been pointed out, it was only ever to meet their own needs. The buffer, which was, it's a phrase everybody's using, but also talks about non-implementation allowance and so on, was only ever for their own purposes. There was never any realistic or proper consideration of unmet needs, and certainly not on the scale. But I would suggest that it is repurpose is a good word, if I can borrow that. It's exactly what has happened, that they've effectively pretended that the allowance for the buffer and non-implementation is able to get them out of jail as far as the duty to cooperate is concerned and dealing with unmet need. And it isn't. It was never for that purpose. Interestingly, in Bournemouth, the inspectors, slightly different issue, but the inspectors were faced with an authority that said they'd chosen a number because of constraints, and then that got repurposed into a figure that was justified as an exceptional circumstance from deviating from the standard method. And in paragraph 31, the inspectors made clear that it's not right to start with one purpose and then try and embrace another one to justify what you do. It's post-event justification. What you're dealing with is simply a figure that was designed to be a buffer and a non-implementation allowance, and that's all it ever was.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Spry.
Yeah, thank you. Just a reference which hopefully might assist us in going to Mr. Warren's points, and that's in the IIA table 4.1 and then table 4.2, which I think makes clear what's basically gone on here. So table, sorry, 104, 105, and then 110. So table 4.1 and 104.
And that's SDO2, isn't it?
Yes.
SDO2A, yeah.
Yeah, basically summarises the total number of homes that are being tested in those different options that were explored through the SIP. And what you can see is that option, I won't go through it, but option, you've got total homes at the bottom of the bottom row of that table.
Sorry, I'm just turning that up.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
So the bottom row of table 4.1 identifies the total number of homes that were being tested or assumed within each of those options. And so you can see that all of the options, with the exception of 1A, is 14,000 homes. So and that then informs the scoring that you get in table 4.2, which, I mean, particularly when we're talking about IIA objective SA6, option 1, 1A and 2 get the double pluses, but option 3 gets a lower ranking, as does option 4.
Yeah.
The total number of homes being planned for is the same under all of them. And crucially, what's missing is a notional option 5, which, for example, might have been a combination of all of them. And that could have one way in which the council could have tested an option which explored its ability to deliver a higher number of homes. And it was there in front of them back at the moment when they were doing this early work.
Okay, thank you. I've got the nub of that. Mr. Fox. So, particularly it was the point that I was making to Mr. Pearson, this principle that it was the same level of growth in every option.
Yeah. I just wonder if I may, before we hear the details from Mr. Fox, just going back to the paragraph 4117 that was referred to, just to make the point that it explicitly refers to the expectation that the push strategy will identify and deal with unmet needs of local authorities towards the south of the district. It refers to the whole of the push strategy, which takes us back to the debates that we had earlier, which I'm not going to repeat, but obviously particularly the reference in the push strategy to some provision being made in existing local plans as a first step, which is where we say effectively we are, and then broader strategic sites coming forward through later plan processes, which we say is are now our intention. And of course, just a simple reminder that the testing is to be of all reasonable alternatives. And we do maintain that a totally undefined moving feast is very difficult to pin down as a reasonable option, a reasonable alternative.
Okay. Okay, does anybody want to say anything more on that issue, Mr. Fox?
Thank you. It's just a point of clarification that Mr. Young said. I think it was very clear in the Reg 18 local plan that the unmet, well, at that time it was called a buffer. People got confused with that word, so we changed it to the word unmet need allowance. The buffer, as it was referred to in the Reg 18 local plan, was for basically push and obviously kind of any changes in delivery, etc. That was very clear in the Reg 18 local plan. We only changed the terminology as a result of reps in the Reg 19 plan to say it's unmet need. And obviously we've subsequently said, because obviously the stage we've got at, which we won't go over the detail, obviously that need is for Havant and Portsmouth. So like I say, we've crystallised our thoughts in terms of where that needs to go in the Reg 19. So I do just respectfully disagree that obviously that we've repurposed it, because we were always clear at the beginning about what that buffer.
So that was in the Reg 18
local plan,
to meet unmet needs
That's right.
in
And
line with the push strategy.
That's right.
And then, okay, I understand
so,
what you're
like I
saying.
say, it was very, very clear about its purpose and its intention. And obviously, as ever, it got crystallised because of those steps I've said in terms of obviously the unmet need, all the details in the table. So that's what we did.
Okay, I understand. Thank you. Mr. Berent.
Just going on the last point in terms of the repurposing and the buffer, I think it does say that it would. I think within the IIA that it does relate to unmet need, but it also in terms of changes to the levels of delivery in terms of the standard method in it. So it is essentially trying to do two things, but also it will be in terms of if there's any changes in supply. So because it's right at the level of what it is, level of what the need is, should that need go up, then the amount of contribution towards unmet needs will go down. So or should their supply not be accurate within the in terms of that assessment, then again the amount of contribution to that unmet need will go down. So it is trying to both be a buffer in terms of supply and unmet needs, and also to try and address any changes potentially in the standard method. So it is trying to do a bit of a Swiss Army knife in terms of what it's there for. It's trying to be everything to all men in terms of but depending on what the outcome is. So I think there is quite a bit of uncertainty there. But in terms of the other options and looking at that, it isn't beyond the council to actually have had a look at what was coming down the line in terms of there's many local plans to go for it, and actually trying to fix a precise level of unmet need is a very hard task. But it's not a hard task to know where that it's going up and that there is significant shortfalls. I think especially when you're looking at Havant, Portsmouth, Gosport, those areas which are on the coast and have very limited supplies of land. So that there is quite in a sense, a fixed supply of land in those areas. And so that unmet need could be solidified relatively simply. You may not have a very precise figure, but you'll know a very broad figure, and you'll realise that in terms of that assessment, that 1900 isn't a significant contribution to those significant needs, and you could have looked at a proportion higher, a 10%, 15% above. And I can't remember local authority. I have done so many of these. There are local authorities that do look at scenarios that just look at a scenario that goes beyond what that plan is, recognising that there could be high levels of unmet need, and it would be a reasonable approach to take.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Berent. Mr. Young.
In the Regulation 18 version, which I have in front of me, it refers to, therefore, a buffer of about 1,450 dwellings is provided to cater for potential future increase in the standard method. That's their standard method figure. And in the spirit of cooperation required by government policy to help contribute towards the PFSH shortfall. So 2 things, not one. It is wrong to suggest this is for unmet need. First of all, it's the wrong word. And I think the council have experienced enough planners to know what unmet need is. Secondly, you've been referred to Regulation 18, which talks about it doing 2 separate things. So it was never intended to be just to deal with unmet need. And thirdly, contextually, the numbers that are being talked about, even at that stage, were so large that it was making a incredibly small contribution towards that on its own words, because it's there for 2 separate purposes. And it's a complete lack of clarity. There should have been a figure for unmet need, and that is their own fault. They could have called it unmet need, and they didn't. And then, of course, it migrates entirely into an unmet need from neighbouring authorities issue. But let's be absolutely clear about Regulation 18. The first thing that's identified is anticipated changes to the standard method. And when you look into the detail, it's also about non-implementation. Non-implementation is an authority responsibility, not a duty to cooperate issue.
Thank you. Does the council wish to come back on that? Okay, thank you for that. I'm going to leave the IIA there. I just want to quickly pick up on community involvement. So what you say is that consultation, and we've spoken about consultation, and you carried out 4 rounds of consultation and you got awards for some of them. I can't remember 2 of them, was it? Or 2 of them. Okay. You also carried out consultation with parish councils, and I've heard in reading the reps that there were some concerns about that. Do we have Macra or Barwood, please? Around the table. Okay, could you just explain your concerns in that regard, please?
In terms of community engagement, we through the assessment process, we have raised sort of issues with inaccuracies in what was reported in the SHLA and the IAA. And we went back to the council on these points, which we were just basically provided a basic response in terms of we set out some clear questions and issues that we had with our concerns with the approach, and these were never addressed. In terms of the consultation process with the parish council, we went to speak to the parish council after they did their initial consultation, which we included in our representations, which showed that following their consultation process, the site that was progressed was not the favoured site, basically, and that in fact, if they'd looked at, if they'd approached the favoured site in terms of what the community had gone for, and indeed what the parish council had discussed, they would have come up with a separate.
So are you referring to Knoll and Wickham parish councils?
No, this is Otterbourne Parish Council.
Okay.
So essentially, we raised some issues with this, and we're just told that we'd have to respond through the representations to Reg 18, Reg 19. We provided responses in this regard, which sort of challenged the information that went into the IAA and the SHLA, and we were never. There are also obvious inaccuracies that were never addressed through the process, which our issue is essentially these points have been raised in the Reg 18. They could have been addressed. They weren't.
Okay, so your concern is that responses, the regard that the council had to responses.
Sorry.
Is that right?
Sorry, Mark.
Your concern is the response that the council gave to comments that were made.
Yeah, essentially.
Not the consultation itself.
Well, in terms of the consultation process, our concerns are in relation to how the responses were summarised and responded on. And separately, we also have concerns with the actual sort of process.
Okay. Can I put it to the council, please? So you've heard those comments. It's on process, the way that the consultation responses were summarised, and that the council's response to them. Could you just quickly comment on that, please?
Thank you. Obviously, the consultation that we undertook, we believe is thorough and inclusive. Obviously, learning person over there doesn't agree with obviously the conclusions of that consultation, particularly regarding the site in Otterbourne. We feel that it was comprehensive in terms of basically the consultation that we did with parish councils and engagement. Obviously, some parish councils were more forthcoming than others. Some were very, very good in terms of basically the process that they went through. Others perhaps took a slightly different approach, etc. But obviously, we do rely on parish councils a lot in terms of obviously how we move things forward. And obviously, all the sites were also inspected by officers. Basically, we inspected all sites, the sites before basically we came up with obviously feedback from the obviously the parish councils using the IIA. So basically, we use that collectively to come up with obviously the preferred sites that are in the plan itself. So basically, the consultation is one element. But obviously, we have also visited the site and obviously had landscape officers also visit sites, etc. So it's one element of it. Clearly, obviously, the person down the end of the room doesn't agree with obviously our conclusions regarding Otterbourne, but obviously we still feel that it's best site to be included.
Okay, I understand that, and that's the issue with Wickham and Knoll, and again, that you carried out consultation, but through the evidence-based testing.
Yeah, Wickham and Knoll is slightly more complicated in terms of basically the procedure of events that happened there, and obviously the fact that we didn't actually receive a response from the basically the parish council in terms of obviously their preferred sites. So obviously we did with Wickham and Knoll and Sutton Scotney, we did our own site assessment of the alternative sites, which are part of the evidence base, and obviously concluded which sites we thought, 2 sites in Wickham and Knoll, and obviously in Sutton Scotney, which was the preferred site, but obviously that was informed by that site selection process.
Thank you. That was just thank you for that. Okay. Sorry. Okay. Yes.
Work that we did, the evidence we have actually. Also, sensible came back to me at the point the sites by the parish council. They did basically put O201 as their approach, but they also suggested at the point that they were considering and sorry, the mic wasn't on. And that they would like further consultation with the council, and we're aware through discussions with them subsequently that that consultation never happened. So it's just another point in terms of the consultation going forward.
Okay. How did you deal with that matter? Can I put that to the council, please?
I think the person's actually identified that OT01 was the preferred site from the parish council. So that's the way we proceeded.
Okay. Okay, I'll come to my own conclusions on that. Thank you. Can I just turn to the last matter? And the only reason I raise this is because there are some. So this is with regard to superseded policies, and you are suggesting a change to the submitted plan. Could you just talk me through those? Sorry, can I just go back to the main rods? Can you make sure that they're in order so that I can grapple with them? Thank you very much. Okay.
If I can start with an apology, in the hearing statement 1, I inadvertently put the wrong PM number down.
Yeah.
It should actually be PM 229. I've got copies of basically this, which I'll ask to be distributed.
So this is dealing with
So what the table's trying to be clear about, basically, when a policy has been superseded, updated by a local plan, which was a specific request from yourself. So we try to be clear in this table about what's got on, and obviously in a number of cases. So for example, if I could pull out W7, Central Winchester Regeneration was Silver Hill, and things like that. So we've tried to be as clear as we can about the new name, if I can call it that, of the site, and obviously which ones are superseded. So this is a change to Appendix 2 in the plan. So I'm hoping that will address your question, but I'm happy for you to obviously look at that in your own time.
Okay. So what you've given me here is the suggested proposed modification 229 to address the matter that's raised here.
That's correct. Like I say, apologies for putting the wrong PM number. It confused me yesterday when I was looking for it as well. So sorry about that.
Would you mind just incorporating that?
Yes.
I won't take this as an examination document, as an examination document, because it'll be in ST 014. Okay then. Is there anything else that anybody wishes to raise? Not random, please. Anything? Okay. Okay, it's now 10 to 1. Our next session begins at 2 o'clock. I won't start before 2 o'clock. We'll keep to those times. So that's the importance of stopping in line with the programme so that it doesn't all go awry. Okay, 10 to 1. The hearings are adjourned. Well, this hearing is adjourned and we'll be back again at 2. Thank you very much, everyone who's participated.